Because what we're going to talk about today is how the General Assembly actually works. Sometimes I've retitled this talk as how to pass good bills and, more importantly, how to defeat bad bills. That's extremely important. And the first thing is persistence. Persistence is important. And Bob mentioned it takes a long time to get some things done or to work against something. For example, woman's right to know about abortion, the risk, and all that kind of thing, was first authorized in a Supreme Court decision in about 1980. Can't remember the case right now. Oh, H.L. versus Matheson, I think. Well, it actually passed in our heavily Democratic state Senate in 1981. 1981. In those days, there were lots of pro-life Democrats. This bill actually was sponsored by 4 or 5 senior Democrats, and it passed the Senate in 1981. But then shenanigans took place, and it was recalled, reconsidered, and did not become law for 30 years. 30 years. In part of that time, I was in the House, and we got it through the House several times. And how did we get it through the House? Well, in 1989, we still had a majority Democrat House and Senate. But I had worked with the Democratic representative who had gotten it through the House 2 years before I got there. And I went to every Democrat who had sponsored it when I took his same bill, which I had written for him, but I took his bill and I said, look, you sponsored this for your former person who was then out of office, a great guy named Richard Wright from Columbus County. And, if you believed then what you believe now, and we had like 80 sponsors of that thing. And it passed the House twice, passed the Senate committee. It was sent to Senate Appropriations. The guy in charge of Senate Appropriations was a guy named Ken Royal. Now that name was known to everybody. He was the most powerful Democrat in the state. Even though he had no office, he was like deputy majority leader or something. But in fact, he was in charge. And I was a freshman Republican. He was the in-charge Democrat when Democrats were majority. He sent a message to me. He had been working for the lottery for years. And he said, if we can put your bill and marry it to the lottery bill, we'll pass it. What would you have done? I said, no thanks. So neither of them passed for many more years after that. So you have to make decisions. So that bill took 30 years to pass. Another one, the State Abortion Fund, which was initiated by Jim Hunt, and he was a real extremist on abortion. He's thought of as a very pragmatic, moderate governor. He served 16 years as governor, and he was on many issues that. But on 2 issues, he was extreme. One was taxpayer funding of abortion. To start it, he took lapsed salaries from mental health, he took lapsed salaries from aid to families with dependent children. He took it everywhere to get money, and these were his words, for medically unnecessary abortions up to 20 weeks. That's how extreme he was. Took us 17 years to effectively end that. Another bill I worked on for years was a good faith exception to the exclusionary rule from Mapp and Miranda. If any of y'all ever heard Mapp and Miranda, you have a right to remain silent. Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Okay, that's Miranda. But there's a good faith exception to that, which was in federal law, but not state law. And that took 23 years to get in there till the governor Perdue signed it and in 2011. On the other hand, when the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate decide they want something, they can have something on the floor the next day and force you to vote on it with no analysis, preparation. So it's not quite how it is in the civics books, how a bill becomes law. Okay. Here's some other principles. We were able to stop, those were things that needed to pass, but took a long time. The lottery was in the minds of people for decades and decades before it ever became law. I think we were one of the last states to adopt a lottery. And that happened in 2005. It passed by one vote in the House and on a tie vote, but with Bev Perdue breaking the tie in the Senate. In the House, the Speaker broke 8 rules of the House in order to pass it. On my website, which everyone should know that address, is paulstam.info. I think that's written down here somewhere. Yes, it is, at the very end, paulstam.info. We document all 8 rules that Speaker Jim Black broke to pass the lottery. Now, at that same time, he was also breaking other laws, receiving bribes and giving bribes. And he went to prison, federal prison, for about 3 or 4 years. So if you cheat, karma, is that what they call it? Karma. So if you cheat in little things, just because you have the power to do it, there's always a bigger fish that can get you, right? Okay. Because, now that was in the House. In the Senate, I don't know that they broke any rules, but they did very bad things. Like telling everybody, okay, we're going home for the year. And so a couple of people stayed home, and then suddenly calling them back to pass the lottery by a tie vote, with 2 of the senators who were publicly opposed to it, but obviously privately in favor of it, absent. One was on a delayed honeymoon. He decided that he had not had enough of a honeymoon and he needed to have one to avoid voting on the lottery. Harry Brown, I'll call the names, okay? If you cheat, all right, then let me tell you how the courts cheated. We actually, and the legislature cheated officially. There's a rule that if it's a revenue bill, that it has to be voted, this is in the Constitution, that it has to be voted on 3 separate days, and the votes have to be recorded in the journal. You ever heard of that? Okay, it's good. Because the idea is you have to at least think about revenue bills and some other types of bills too. Well, we sued the lottery over that, or back the year after it was passed, I believe in 2006. Well, the state claimed it wasn't a revenue bill. Wait a minute, the lottery is not a revenue bill. The fiscal note that they relied on to show how much money we were going to get said like, well, $600 million a year. But that was not a revenue bill. So, and how could it not be a revenue bill? And by the way, I'm interruptible from time to time, but I'm going to tell you how they said it was not a revenue bill. If you buy a lottery ticket, do you pay sales tax on that lottery ticket? No. There's no sales tax on it. So therefore, how could it be a revenue bill? Well, you know, you go to a restaurant and you pay tax on your cup of coffee, right? But sometimes you can get a cup of coffee somewhere where the seller just pays the tax to make it like an even dollar or $5, okay? And they pay the tax. Well, the tax is there. It's just embedded in the price. And unlike the sales tax, which is depending where you live, 6, 7, 8%, the lottery tax, according to the National Tax Foundation, is about 29 cents out of every dollar. It's a big sales tax. It's just embedded in the price. But it wasn't a revenue bill, so therefore, they didn't have to follow those rules. I remember it very well. The lottery bill came to the floor for second reading in the House before the actual text, and this was before computers were in use, and it actually was being called upon to be debated before the last version was passed out. So we got him to say, please, can we have a slight delay while we can look at the bill? He says, well, no, but we won't vote on it until it's all passed out. All right, all those in favor, vote aye. And it came up to like defeated by one vote, but then one member ran up and got her vote changed, which was, that part was legal. And then he said, the bill having passed its second reading, the bill will, without objection, be read a third time on the same day. Meanwhile, while he's saying that, the bill having passed second reading, the bill will, I was saying, objection, 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 objection. But he still said, without objection, the vote on third reading. And, you know, you couldn't tell whether it was who would. He said, vote. The bill having passed third reading will be sent to the Senate. Well, all that about the lottery, there's a stench on the lottery that will always be there because it got there by cheating. And we're working now with the state auditor to show all the other ways that the lottery cheats all gamblers all the time. That's another lecture. Okay. Let's take another example of how interest groups can cheat. Have you heard of the Hyde Amendment, which is annual amendment? It's actually in many different forms and has been part of federal budgets for 50 years, which prohibits abortion funding by the federal government, except in cases where the mother's life is in danger or serious physical health risk to the mother, or in cases of rape or incest. And the effect of that is to virtually stop all 99% of federal abortion funding. That's a particular issue today on the ACA subsidies, whether that will apply if they put these subsidies back in. Well, those exceptions amount to 1% or less of all abortions. But it's top of the mind, as they say, for the people who think that that is much more prevalent than it actually is. You know, it must be 20% or 50%, but it's 1%. This started back in the early 60s, before Roe v. Wade, when the abortion interest groups wanted to make people think that it was really important to have abortion because of rape, incest, gang rape, the worst of the worst, all that kind of thing. The American Law Institute in 1967, which is purely an advisory group, but a important advisory group, recommended to states that they continue to prohibit abortions, but have about 8 exceptions that collectively would allow most abortions. Unknown to many people, North Carolina was one of those states that essentially legalized most abortions prior to Roe versus Wade in 1967. And that was the brainchild of a fellow you may have heard of, his brother, Charles Kuralt. You ever heard that name? A reporter. Well, his brother was head of social services in Mecklenburg County. And he was the initiator of this in 1967. He primarily talked about the huge quantity of welfare cases in Charlotte of disabled children who would grow up to be, wards of the state. It was all this, we can't afford to have all this welfare. And that passed. There was some opposition, not much from the Catholic Church, but from some Catholics, individual Catholic priests or whatever, not as I recall from reading about it. I'm not that old. That was 1967 when I was in high school. But it passed, and there were 4 states that had very liberal abortion laws before Roe v. Wade. But then Roe v. Wade, took it away from everybody. So Jim Hunt, shortly after Roe v. Wade, the Hyde Amendment at the federal level prohibited federal government spending for most welfare abortions. But Jim Hunt did not think that was right. So in his first term as governor, 77, 78, he created the state abortion fund, as I mentioned, for medically unnecessary abortions. And that, you can get all the details on that in another paper that's on our website, was doing about 6,000 a year at one point. When finally it was restricted to only the life of the mother, rape or incest, it went from 6,000 a year to 60 a year. What's percentage is that? That's 1%, right? That's how we know that that's the approximate percentage for these exceptions. So, one time in 89, 90, this just, how many of y'all play chess at least once a year? Okay, you know what a knight fork is? Okay. You can impale your opponent on the horns of a dilemma, right? Okay. So we did that in 89. The pro-abortion people, in those days there were still lots of enough Democrat pro-life people to stop this. The pro-abortionists wanted to have $500,000 per year for any abortion up to 20 weeks. I said, and they were crying, but that's so small, it'll only last half the year with using that money, $500,000. So we offered them, okay, y'all are really big on these exceptions. We'll have all these exceptions. It'll last all year, same amount of money. So you would think if those exceptions were really important to them, that they would have taken that. But it wasn't. They just wanted as much money and as many abortions as possible. So we had abortions for any reason for half the year, and no abortions at all, state funded, for the other half of the year. That's part of legislative gamesmanship to try to put your opponent, make them vote for something that won't look good. Okay. Number 4, another legislative tactic we call everybody's on board. Some people who want a law to pass, they meet with the lobbyists. Maybe the lobbyist includes the administration, any state agencies. They come up with a proposal and they get up there and they say, Mr. Speaker, I won't say much about this bill. I ask you to vote the green button. Everybody's on board. Well, that's sort of like a pirate taking another ship and saying, everybody's on board now. So true getting them on board is when you meet with the affected groups ahead of time. You get broad public input. You have your bill out there well ahead of time so that people can comment. And then, when not very many people oppose it, then you can actually say, everybody's on board, and you can give them a list of all the people you've talked to. And even people who don't agree with it will agree that they got a fair chance. I give an example of one that didn't fit that. Now, before I go on, 3 short questions for 3 short answers. So, yes, sir.
So about your question on it was a bill on, I think it was abortion, and you were trying to get it through it was that last part with the guy that was the speaker, and you were like, y'all pass it if you have, you put other bill in there about the lottery. What was your deciding factor on deciding okay, I'm gonna let this one go because I really don't like this bill? What was what a view you're having on that?
Okay. Well, you often package good things with okay things, or but I didn't think that packaging 2 evil things in the same package would be wise. And that was just a decision I made. And I think it was a wise decision. It takes a long time to get things, but also when certain things, finally they get them done, they can last forever. Whereas the woman's right to know, even though it took a long time, no, that wasn't the 31 years, that was the 20 years. It took 20 years to get it done. It was just weighing. All right, second question. Yes, sir.
Have you had any experience with inside trading? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Not inside trading, but a lot of dealing with suspicion that bills were being done for money. Okay. Well, the way you deal with it is, the way I dealt with it, is I would take my suspicions to people who could more thoroughly investigate it than I could. And I wouldn't throw out accusations of bribery if I didn't have the facts, but I would present the facts to people who could find out. Third question. Yes, sir.
Yes. So your first comment was on persistence.
Yes.
What does it take for you is it more of personal willpower? But I know you'll probably get to this later on, but it does take not just your personal energies, but the people around you as well.
Yeah.
How much of that is actually your personal willpower if you want to uphold it?
Well, I'd say it's more stubbornness than anything else. First time I lost a re-election was in 1990. I had one term, and then I was out for about 10 years. So after I was out, just my pride said, some of those bills that I was supporting that didn't pass, I might can get them passed even when I'm not there. And I did get a couple of them, but it was stubbornness and then maintaining your communication with the people who were with you at the time. You know, you got to build up a good email list. Any of y'all want to get on my email list? I have 4,000 of my favorite electronic friends, which you can join, and you get something about once a month. But you have to maintain communication, maintain your awareness of what's happening on that issue. So there you go. Okay, we'll take more questions later. Item 5 on your sheet there. What is success in legislation? We'll talk later about how to stop legislation. Let's take baseball as an example. First base, second base, third base, a run before your side is out actually counts, right? If you leave ducks on the pond, they don't count. Y'all know what leaving ducks on the pond? Okay. I played baseball for about half a year one time. But a lot of new legislators especially, but also immature legislators, think they have done something big, and they'll send out a press release when they file a bill. And then some newspaper organizations will say, the North Carolina legislature has introduced a bill to do away with freedom of religion. I remember that headline one time. It's already passed its first reading. Okay, now what's the problem with that? First of all bills pass their first reading. This is what happens. Introduction of bills and resolutions, clerk will read. House Bill 22, a bill to abolish sanity. That was the reading. And it was referred to committee. And the speaker says, referred to the Committee on Insane Asylums. Okay. That bill, and secondly, North Carolina did not introduce a bill. One person who may have been crazy himself introduced a bill. You see what I'm saying? You got to read these press accounts with discretion. I'm just debating whether to give you an example. Generally, musical performances are not allowed on the floor of the House for any reason. So one day during a recess, my LA, who was an accomplished violinist, was allowed during a recess by the clerk, a Democrat, to have like a 8-minute concert. And it was nice. It was nice. The last thing she played was fit like a, you know, whatever. And a Baptist preacher on the front row was up there doing it with the Democrat clerk of the House, okay? Doing just a jig or something. Well, 100,000 times on, I'll say YouTube for lack of remembering, this was viewed on YouTube with a reporter who was sitting in the back row. Republicans are dancing on the grave of the Democrats. Because the Senate, unbeknownst to the House, had just passed over to the House a bill on voter suppression, voter ID, okay? And we didn't actually know it, but that reporting got 100,000 views, okay? Look it up on YouTube. It's probably under the name of Republicans Dancing on the Grave of Democrats. I don't know how you look things up. Okay. how did I get off? All right, what I was saying was don't believe what anything on the social media ever says about anything political. It's 90% likely to be false, and you'll never know whether it's actually true. Y'all can understand what I'm saying? Okay. All right, but to score a run, your single is not filing a bill. Instead, it is meeting with interested groups on your side, sometimes with the other side, if you want to try to get amendments in there. Doing all the fiscal research to know how much the bill is going to cost, so you have a fiscal memo on your desk already. Have talked to the probable chair of the committee it'll go to, so you make sure that it goes to a committee that is actually likely to approve it. That's first base. Okay? Now, what's second base? Getting it through all the committees of the House and the floor of the House with all the amendments, be prepared for all the amendments, have your vote count as closely as you can get ready so you know you're going to win. There's no point in presenting it. It's actually a negative thing for it to lose, because then you're a loser and it's less likely to come up next time. Okay, so that's second base. Then you got to get it through the Senate and the governor to sign it, or if he vetoes it, to override the veto. And that's intricate. But that's just third base. That's not a real home run. The home run is if that law becomes operative. Now, that could require rulemaking by executive agencies. It could require letting all the press know about the law so that people know not to violate the law. Or other people who want to enforce the law privately, that they know that it's there. That is a true home run, and that requires that you work after the bill is signed to get it done. Okay, let's do one more. I have a good friend, Rick Glazier, and he and I served pretty much the same time for about 15 years. And he was the very best speaker on the other side, debater. We disagreed on anything related to sex or the death penalty or a couple other things. But other than that, he was very reasonable. And we got a lot of bills passed together. And if we were together on one, we'd usually pass it unanimously. Okay? And I still meet with him every couple of months to see how things are going. And he helps on a lot of things. He says his vote for the lottery was the worst thing he ever did. Remember, it passed by one vote? Rick Glazier from Fayetteville. Well, actually, now he's in Raleigh. And my point there is, don't burn your bridges. Your opponent today will be your ally tomorrow. And if you're nasty to the other side, or call them names like you liberals, or you crooked, whatever, anything that their mother would not approve of, then you will have that, not only that member, but all that member's friends who will vote against your bill just because he doesn't like you. And that's not the way to get bills passed. And some people complain about members who say too much nice about their opponents because they're not fighting hard enough. They're not fighting for you, So legislative courtesy, both on the floor, in committee, and elsewise, is important. My mother and father, when I had my first session in 89-90, they would watch the nightly news show that covered the General Assembly. It's now weekly, and it's called States Lines, public TV. But then it was 30 minutes every weekday night. And my mother especially knew more of what was actually happening than I did, because they would go around from one committee, the most important things happening, whereas I was stuck in a committee maybe, talking about some esoteric thing. And one day she called me. She called me by what she always called me, Skipper. Skipper, you are not being nice to the Democrats. You are saying too many mean things. So I had to reform. And I did reform. That was in my very first term of my 16 years. I reformed because my mother told me I was embarrassing her. So you need to have somebody that can embarrass you. Okay, tell you when you did wrong. Seating is important in a legislative thing, where you sit. You would think, what does that matter? Everybody, knows his own mind. But it's not that way. One of the first things in the 2003 session was, it was 60-60, and we went 5 days without electing a speaker. And they had put a person who's real outspoken against the other side in, let's say, that corner right there, on the back row. Okay, so he would have less influence. But who did he put right there, there, and there, surrounding him? 3 lawyers. And there are not that many lawyers in the House. So what he did was to give to this outspoken, obstreperous person like a whole law firm to help him. Okay. Typically, in a legislative assembly, this comes from the French National Assembly in 1780s or whatever. The Conservative Party is on the right to the Speaker. The more liberal party is on the left. That's just custom, right? But when I was first minority leader, the majority leader was right there where everybody could see him. But he put me way on the side as minority leader. And my minority, even though we were minority, was stretched around the sides and the back. So we couldn't communicate with each other. You see what I'm saying? But one time when he had me on the back row, right back there, what's behind the back row? Pews with the legislative staffers there, the people who are there to help you with amendments. So I'm back there as my second term ever. Don't know much. But the people who know a whole lot about stuff are sitting right behind me. I have my whole law firm sitting right behind me. Okay? And so up here, debate's going on. It's clear that one person is misunderstanding the nature of a bill. They're trying to explain it to him, and I'm noticing that we just need to change a word or two to make this clear. So here comes a staffer. Do this amendment, per amendment. Get a page. Okay. Then what happens? There's nothing wrong with the bill itself. All in favor of the bill, aye. All opposed, no. The bill passes without objection. And I would say, objection. I didn't have to yell it out like I did on the lottery. Objection. So the Speaker would say the bill remains on the calendar for the next day, right? So the sponsor of that bill will come running back to me and say, what's the matter with my bill? Why is you, as a very junior legislator, objecting to my bill? I said, staff suggests this amendment to make your bill a little bit better. He said, okay. Yeah, run your amendment. So I say, Mr. Speaker, at appropriate time, I withdraw my objection to third reading. And then the sponsor says, Stam has a good amendment, please vote for it. So they got used to voting for my amendments because I had staff right behind me. Okay, let's take about 4 or 5 questions right here. All right, ready? And remember, I'm going to call on you if you don't respond. I'll tell you a joke about that. Yes, sir.
How do you know what to focus on? Because everything takes so long. How do you know?
Oh, what to focus on? That's a real problem in that when I was in leadership for about 10 years, I would make a list of all the things that I wanted to accomplish that day when I came in that morning. And usually by noon, everything on that list was off and I had 8 new things to worry about. That's a real problem. But I would spend most of my time on things that I was particularly working on. And I have on my website, I have a complete history of what I worked on. Okay, second. Didn't you already get one? No, behind you. Yes.
Yes, sir. My question was, you referred to like the traditional structure of how bills are passed, like they're taught in civics books, are not quite like how bills are passed in reality. And
Yep.
would you define the difference?
Yes, and you can read this later. Legislative hitchhiking is item 10. And if you will remember, a bill is not a law. The law is what's in the bill. The bill is a vessel to get your bill passed. But there are many, many vessels. So in a battle with cavalry, if your horse goes down, you grab another horse. Follow what I'm saying? Your bill might not go through, but if you can get the contents of that bill into another bill that will go through, a must-pass bill, you win. Now, if you just are bound and determined that your bill with your name on it has to be the bill signed by the governor and you get a lot of press coverage, and a lot of praise, then you don't get much done. But if you're willing to take your issues and put them in some bigger bill, then you'll get a lot done. And I'll come back to that depending on what other questions are asked. Yes, sir.
So I actually have a question somewhat about those bigger bills and the idea of a must-pass bill. So if you combine multiple different distinct policies into one bill, does that blur the line about, like, how do you deal with that, I guess?
That is a real abuse that the legislature has gotten into in the last few years of combining things just to make sure you have enough votes. On the other hand, you have to have enough weight on a boat to steer it, but you may put so much on it that you sink it. So the current budget impasse between the House and Senate is that. I'll give you an example. Bob Luddy and I have worked against these targeted tax incentives for a long time. You know what I'm talking about? And we actually defeated one in the 2014 session, because so much other stuff, unrelated, was put in the same bill that we had a majority that could find something to hate in it. Okay? Now, they're supposed to be on one subject, or that's not quite right. They're supposed to be where you can break them apart if they're on more than one subject, but that is such a loose definition. They'll find some way to say things are related, so you basically don't even try. We'll talk more about that issue depending on other questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Do you ever sort of get the sense working with, it does seem like there's sometimes some trickery that sort of happens, and do you ever get the sense that people in the legislature are working to pass things for their personal reasons versus a reflection of what their constituents want? Like, for example, the one gentleman where he had such an extreme view of how public funds should be spent on abortion, you can imagine at that time that that was really the wish of his constituents. But what is that? How do you work with that? Like, if you feel like you're sort of trying to work with a person who has a personal something they want to do for their personal reasons. What do you do?
Well, that was the governor, okay? It wasn't just some one legislator. It was Governor Jim Hunt, and he was very much against public on that one, public funding for medically unnecessary abortions. And we just fought him. But as governor, you know, he could get members to vote for him if they were not really committed, okay? He didn't have a veto at the time, but he had lots of patronage. So, now, if it's not the governor, what we always told the members, you know, vote your conscience first, vote your constituents. If that doesn't tell you, vote your rights, the opinions of your constituents. But that's hard to know a lot of times, really hard to know, because the loudest voice is not necessarily the voice of the people. And third, on a very few things, vote with the caucus unless it violates your conscience. And those few things, when I was there, it was only like two things, but they've tightened that up a lot now. So the caucuses try to tell people, not that they can make them vote, but they really lean on them on more things than they used to. Yes, sir.
What sort of evidence, beyond making a logical argument in favor of a bill, what does the evidence look like? Would you go out and survey the public? What sort of research is done to back up the motivation for a bill?
Excellent question. A true survey to find out things like that is very expensive. It's a lot harder than you think it is. You know, with 600 to be at all scientific, you know, it might cost you $10,000. 80% of the bills passed in the Assembly are either unanimous or near unanimous. About 10% are controversial, but not between parties. And then another 10% are controversial between the two parties. So the way you find out what people think is you get loads of email. You get lobbyists on big issues, but not on little ones. For example, the last session signed up on sports betting and casinos were 70 lobbyists. Typical bills are 0, or maybe 1, or maybe someone from the Department of Administration. You just have to have a sense of who might, and a good lobbyist will tell you who might be opposed to this, because you're going to find out anyway. And if the good lobbyist tells you who will be opposed, then that good lobbyist can also say, but they're wrong because so-and-so. And they'll leave you with a 1-page piece of paper, not a 10-page, not a 10-pager. My pages are a lot longer, but I've learned to cut them down when sending them to other legislators because they won't read more than that. Okay. All right, I think maybe 5 minutes, maybe more. Yeah, 5 minutes more. I may have one last thing to finish up with. And I'll just be very briefly on these, then maybe a couple minutes of questions. You can't do it alone in a legislature. You got to nurture your allies so that they will really be allied with you and will work with you. And listen to people, whether they're much older or much younger, very experienced, inexperienced. And then pick your enemies carefully. Okay? I won't say too much more on that. A lot of people in the grassroots say, well, get them recorded, make them vote, get them on record. No, because if you have not really worked it and you get a vote, it makes it much less likely that you'll prevail next time. You want to get votes when you're going up, not going down. Okay. Two very short things. One, sometimes you just have to wait till your opponent leaves office to get a bill through. I'll give you a couple examples of that, but finally this. Don't just do something, stand there. What? What could he possibly mean by that? So I'll give you an example. Basketball game, my son's playing, going against Cary. We're down by 3 points. 5 seconds to go. We have the ball. My son was a center for Apex. 5 minutes to go, and a guard noticed that he could slip in there and do an easy layup. He did it. Yay, yay, yay. Not a good idea. We lost by 1 point because we got 2. If you're not sure what to do, don't just do something to do it. Think about it. Think about it. Okay, about two more minutes for questions. Yes, ma'am.
They say the government's wheels turn very, very slowly.
Yes.
Would you
Can be
say-
very fast, but usually very slow.
Well, through the years, you have either supernatural perseverance or very natural stubbornness
Stubbornness, there you
to
go.
deal with that. But some have said that that can be a safety measure,
Yeah.
that they will turn slowly, and some say it's a detriment. In all your years that you've been doing this, where would you land in those?
May I give an example? This lady in Charlotte was murdered on a train, Irina. Everybody heard about that? So they immediately called a special session and passed Irina's law. Okay. First of all, nothing in the bill would have actually stopped what happened. Number two, some of the things in the bill made things worse. And number three, it was bad politics, because if what you're saying is this murder happened because the law wasn't right, all the people pushing for it had been in office for the previous 10 years, so the people will eventually say, why didn't you think of that before she got murdered? Sometimes, you get what I'm saying? Okay. One last question. Yes, sir.
So this is like a question about your range of experience. So throughout your time supporting different bills, is there ever a bill you found that made like sense logically, but once it maybe got through, it had unintended consequences that maybe you didn't see from the logic, but later on you realized it was like an unsound bit, like a argument for the bill?
Yes, and I can give you a better example of, just come to my mind, bills that I prepared that would have been bad, but the second version was better, the version in the next year, it failed. Finally, I got it right, and it passed, and I was glad that it didn't pass the first, second, third. But the unintended consequence, I'll give you one example. May I give an example?
Yeah.
Okay. Pro-life groups, they like to push as safe haven baby boxes. You know what I'm talking about? You can leave your kid here in the first 30 days, without being criminally liable, and we'll take care of it. And pushes to advertise that. Well, the problem is, to me who think statistically, yes, there's a dozen cases of that a year, and the baby boxes maybe save 1 or 2 kids per year. But on the back of an envelope, I remember explaining to the health director of the state, we calculated jointly that yes, but it probably will cause another several dozen children to die. Because why? If you advertise this widely to the public, then that's one more reason that a guy can talk a girl into sex. Oh, even if you get pregnant, you can, leave it at the baby box, And then, if you multiply that times the number of premature children and the number of those that are so premature that they die, more will actually die from that well-meaning thought than you're saving. So you're weighing one future person's life against another person's life, which is tough. But don't do trivial things without thinking about the unintended consequence. Okay, thank you all very much for having me. All right.